Hi everyone, Dan here back with another Coffee Club video. So for the month of March, what we wanted to do is send out two coffees from our longtime partner producing farm in Brazil, Cachoeira de Grama. These two coffees are different varieties, but they're also processed quite differently. So what we wanted to touch on this month is a bit about processing and about fermentation and how that kind of affects what we're tasting in the cup. So fermentation is something that happens both naturally and can also be done by intervention during coffee processing. Typically it happens with naturally occurring yeast and bacteria that are interacting and breaking down the sugars of the coffee cherry. And usually this is something that is tracked by time and sometimes temperature. Fermentation can have a really important impact on the kind of end product of the green coffee. It can lead to kind of high scoring complex coffees, but it can also lead to kind of unpleasant defects that would lead to a very low scoring coffee. And for kind of the latter reasons, those negative things, there were times in the past where fermentation was trying to be kind of avoided or mitigated. But currently fermentation is seen as a really integral part of coffee processing and also to the taste and the quality of the coffee. So the first coffee I want to talk about is the Mundo Novo variety. This is a naturally processed coffee, which basically means that after being picked right from the tree, the cherries are sent through fermentation and into drying with their skin or their pulp intact. The big difference between this coffee and other naturals that they're processing at the Cachoeira de Grama farm is basically that this was inoculated with a very specific yeast strain for an experimental fermentation. So basically the process ended up being them taking the ripe cherries and putting them into these big plastic bins and then inoculating those cherries with the yeast and leaving that to ferment for 96 hours. And through those 96 hours, the team there was analyzing things like odor, pH, and temperature. So once that was the fermentation was done, the coffee was sent to the greenhouses to dry. And this is actually an experiment that they started a few years ago. And they started it with 15 different yeast strains and have actually been able to narrow it down to 2 strains that they think do a great job of improving coffee flavor. So why do they want to do these experiments? It's basically to create a differentiated product. But what they need to know is whether they can produce kind of maximum quality and consistency, and also a process that can be replicated over time and with a lot more coffee. So currently they're not actually scaling these to really large lots. It's kind of contained to small lots, but they're having some success, and they're finding that in general, what you get from these yeast fermented coffees when it kind of works out and it's done well is that you get more fruit forward flavors and more floral aspects of the coffee. And that's kind of exactly what we're finding in this particular offering. We're finding some delicate floral notes, a lot of strawberry and like cherry-like candy notes, a kind of sweet pastry note that reminds us of biscotti, and also kind of a dark chocolate finish. So we're really enjoying this coffee. It's actually the first yeast fermented or the first kind of experimental coffee that we've brought in from Cachoeira de Grama, and we're really looking forward to tasting what's to come. So what we have to accompany the Mundo Novo, or to kind of contrast it for flavor and processing, is this Pulp Natural Yellow Bourbon. So the Pulp Natural process is quite similar to what we know as the honey process in Costa Rica. And basically what happens with that is the pulp or the skin and some of the mucilage of the cherries are removed from the seeds right in the beginning of processing. And what they usually do is they send the cherries through a mechanical demucilager, or a machine that basically pushes the cherries with pressure through a screen. And that's what actually separates the skin and the mucilage. After that, they're actually sent to the patios or to the greenhouses to dry. And that's where some fermentation would be happening with kind of naturally occurring yeast and bacteria. It would be basically happening with whatever kind of sugar or mucilage is left on the seeds out when it's drying. And what we think is probably happening is a much more kind of minimal amount of fermentation compared to something like what happened with this Mundo Novo. We find Pulp Naturals to be quite consistent in flavor profile, very balanced cups with a lot of chocolatey notes and nutty notes, and that's kind of exactly what we're finding in this coffee. It reminds us definitely of like eating a nice peach cobbler, a milk chocolate bar, and also kind of like creamy cashews. So we really hope you enjoy these coffees. We're loving them here at the roastery. And we hope that you kind of get a chance to taste them side by side and really think about how the fermentation and also the processing might be affecting what you're tasting in the cup. Thank you again so much for watching, and yeah, we'll see you again next month.